The day I became the most hated person in my neighborhood was the day I discovered I owned it. Or, more precisely, a significant disputed portion of it, specifically the sparkling expanse of water that sat like a jewel at its heart. I promise you won't see this ending coming. It started with a ridiculous $50 fine for what they called unauthorized recreational use of the lake, a body of water I had considered my sanctuary for decades. What she, the self-appointed queen of the homeowners association, didn't know was I had inherited something far more valuable than a lakeside cabin. I had inherited the very lake itself, a truth that would eventually unravel her carefully constructed empire of control and snobbery. Let me know in the comments what you would have done if your peace and your past had been so brazenly challenged. My life had, for the better part of a year, been a carefully constructed exercise in quietude. I was Elias Thorne, or at least I had been Elias Thorne, the corporate lawyer, the deal closer, the man who thrived in the white-hot crucible of high-stakes mergers and acquisitions. But then the crucible cooled. My grandfather, a man of quiet strength and profound wisdom, had passed away, leaving me his lakeside cabin, a place that held more memories than square footage. It was there, amidst the rustling pines and the gentle lapping of water, that I sought refuge from the burnout, the constant hum of my previous life, and the dull ache of grief. The cabin itself was modest, worn around the edges like a favorite sweater, but the land it sat on, curving around a secluded cove of Lake Serenity, was priceless. My grandfather had always called it our kingdom of peace. He had taught me to fish from its rickety dock, to paddle a canoe across its glassy surface at dawn, to simply be in its embrace. The lake was more than just water. It was a living memorial, a conduit to the man who had shaped me. Its surface, shimmering under the sun, reflected not just the sky, but the quiet, unyielding strength of family. Every ripple was a memory. Every fish I caught, a whispered conversation with a past I cherished. I had moved in fully, leaving the city behind, intending to spend my days in quiet contemplation, maybe dabbling in pro bono legal work, but mostly just healing. My professional superpower, the meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail required in corporate real estate and property law, lay dormant, a sheathed sword. I was, to all outward appearances, just another retiree seeking solace, an unassuming individual content with the simple rhythms of nature. That illusion shattered one Tuesday morning. I was on my dock, meticulously untangling a stubborn snarl on my fishing line, the sun warm on my back, the only sound the chirping of unseen birds. I had just cast my line, the sinker plopping softly into the water, when a shadow fell across me. It wasn't a shadow of a cloud or a tree. It was the shadow of an immaculate, pearl-white Range Rover, parked at an impossible angle on the narrow gravel path leading to my property. Out of it stepped Patricia Vance. Patricia, or Patty, as she insisted on being called by those she deemed worthy of such familiarity, a list which, I quickly learned, did not include me, was the reigning monarch of the Grand Pines Estates Homeowners Association. She was, in essence, the universal, I want to speak to the manager, haircut personified, but with a platinum blonde coiffure that seemed sculpted from solid granite. Every aspect of her appearance screamed expensive, from her perfectly tailored pastel pantsuit to the oversized, designer sunglasses that obscured half her face. Her voice, when it came, was a carefully modulated drone, laced with an unmistakable undercurrent of condescension. Elias Thorne, I presume, she intoned, her voice cutting through the peaceful morning air like a rusty saw. She didn't wait for a reply, already striding onto my private dock without invitation, her expensive leather flats echoing dully on the weathered wood. I'm President Vance of the HOA board, and we have a problem. I slowly reeled in my line, my gaze fixed on the bobber, feigning a composure I didn't entirely feel. My grandfather had always taught me that the measure of a man wasn't in how he reacted to peace, but how he reacted to provocation. A problem, President Vance? I asked, keeping my voice even, almost bored. I wasn't aware. My understanding was that my property taxes were paid, my lawn maintained, and my general existence as unobtrusive as possible. She scoffed, a tiny dismissive sound that was barely audible but carried the weight of 1,000 judgments. Obtrusive, Mr. Thorne, is precisely the word. Or rather, what you're doing is. The Grand Pines Lake, as you should well know, is an ornamental feature. It's for aesthetic enjoyment. It contributes to the overall beauty and property value of our community. It is emphatically not for recreational use of the common variety. Her eyes, now visible as she pushed her sunglasses up her nose, swept over my fishing rod, my bait bucket, my worn canvas hat, as if they were objects of unimaginable vulgarity. Common variety? I echoed, a flicker of irritation igniting in my chest. I'm fishing President Vance, as my grandfather did, and his father before him, on this very lake. It's a quiet pastime. How exactly is this detrimental to the overall beauty and property value? Regulations, Mr. Thorne. Bylaws. Section 4C, subsection B, paragraph 7. Lake Serenity shall be maintained as a natural aesthetic feature, and no recreational activities, including but not limited to fishing, motorized boating, or swimming, are permitted without express written consent from the HOA board, and trust me, she added, a thin, superior smile stretching her lips, you do not have express written consent. In fact, you're in violation of no less than 3 subsections. Consider this a formal warning and a $50 fine for your brazen disregard. It will be added to your next quarterly assessment. She thrust a crisp, laminated card, complete with the HOA logo, into my hand. It looked like a citation. I stared at the card, then at her, the serene morning suddenly tainted. $50. It wasn't the money. It was the principle, the sheer audacity of this woman, dictating how I lived on my own property, how I honored my grandfather's memory. The lake, my sanctuary, was now under her jurisdiction. The injustice boiled beneath my calm facade. My initial reaction was a familiar surge of anger, the kind that used to fuel my most aggressive legal battles. It was the instinctive desire to lash out, to challenge, to demand an explanation that she probably couldn't give. But then, the more measured part of my mind, the part honed by years of strategic thinking, began to work. $50 was nothing. A nuisance. I could simply pay it, store my fishing gear, and find another way to honor my grandfather. Peace, I told myself, was paramount. After all I had been through, wasn't avoiding conflict the path of least resistance, the surest way back to the tranquility I craved. But as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across my dock, I replayed her words. Common variety, bylaws, ornamental feature, each phrase was a tiny, insidious barb, designed to diminish not just my activity, but my very right to exist as I pleased on my own land. And then, a memory surfaced, clear as the lake on a windless day. My grandfather, sitting beside me on this very dock, a gnarled hand resting on my shoulder. Elias, he'd said, his voice raspy with age, but firm with conviction, don't let anyone steal your peace, especially not a bully. They only take what you give them. It wasn't just about a $50 fine. It was about my grandfather's legacy. It was about the principle of ownership, of personal freedom, of the sanctity of one's chosen refuge. The tranquility I sought could not be bought by capitulation. It had to be defended. And in that moment, the sleeping giant, the dormant corporate lawyer within me, began to stir. The casual fisherman was gone, replaced by a strategist. My legal career, particularly my specialization in property law and complex corporate structures, had left me with a unique set of skills. I knew how to untangle snarled deeds, how to trace ownership through decades of transactions, how to find the hidden threads that tied vast swathes of land to obscure holding companies. This wasn't just my job. It was a compulsion, a puzzle I delighted in solving. I had, in my more cutthroat days, been called a forensic land detective, a title I secretly relished. The next morning, the fishing rods remained tucked away. In their place, my laptop glowed, surrounded by stacks of old documents, maps, and a dizzying array of county records, digital and physical. I started with the most basic premise. the HOA. Every HOA is founded on a master declaration, a set of covenants, conditions, and restrictions filed with the county. I pulled the original filing for Grand Pines Estates. It was a thick document, dense with legalese, but my eyes scanned it with the practiced ease of a musician reading a score. It outlined the common areas, the individual lots, the responsibilities of the HOA. My grandfather, bless his meticulous soul, had kept everything. In a dusty, old filing cabinet, tucked behind tax returns from the 1970s, I found his original deed for the cabin property. It was fascinating. The boundaries were clearly delineated, hugging the shoreline. But something else caught my eye, an old, faded plat map, attached as an addendum. It depicted Lake Serenity not as a uniform body of water within the Grand Pines Estate's boundaries, but as a separate, distinct parcel. And there, scrawled in faint, archaic script, was a parcel number that differed from all the others. My heart began to beat a little faster. This was a deviation, an anomaly. It suggested the lake itself might have a separate chain of title. I cross-referenced the parcel number with county land records, going back further and further in time. It led me down a rabbit hole of land grants, trust deeds, and obscure corporate filings. I traced the ownership through a series of shell corporations, each one dissolving into another, until I hit bedrock. A small, almost invisible entity named Serenity Holdings LLC, incorporated in 1957. That was the key. Serenity Holdings LLC was the true owner of Lake Serenity, not the Grand Pines Estates HOA. The HOA's founding documents merely granted them easements for aesthetic maintenance and community viewing access over the lake, subject to the explicit approval of the lake's owner. They didn't own a drop of it. And then, the final, jaw-dropping revelation. Digging through another box of my grandfather's papers, almost hidden beneath a pile of old fishing magazines, I found it. A stock certificate for Serenity Holdings LLC, all 100% of its shares, made out to Horace Thorne, my grandfather. Dated 1965, and neatly paperclipped to it, a recent, professionally executed will, leaving all shares and ownership interests in Serenity Holdings LLC to me, Elias Thorne. I own the lake. All of it. The entire sparkling, contested body of water. Patty Vance, the HOA, and every single resident of Grand Pines Estates were operating under a massive, generations-old delusion. The HOA hadn't owned the lake for over half a century. My grandfather, quietly, without fanfare, had acquired the company that owned the lake, holding it in trust, allowing the community to enjoy it under the benign assumption that it was common property. He had never used his ownership as leverage, never imposed restrictions. He had simply been a good neighbor, a silent steward. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. Patty Vance had, through her arrogance and ignorance, declared war on the very man who held the keys to her perceived dominion. The sleeping giant wasn't just awake. He was beginning to plan his counterattack. The first person I called was Arthur Sterling. Arthur had been my mentor, the grizzled, brilliant senior partner who had taught me the finer points of corporate real estate law, the man who believed that every dispute was a puzzle, and every puzzle had a solution hidden in plain sight. He was enjoying a well-deserved retirement in Florida, but his mind was still as sharp as a newly honed blade. I laid out the entire narrative from Patty's initial pronouncement on my dock to the discovery of Serenity Holdings LLC and the stock certificate. I heard a low whistle on the other end of the line. "Elias, my boy," Arthur rumbled, his voice of familiar comfort. "You've done it again. You found the ghost in the machine. This isn't just a good hand. This is a full house, straight flush, and 4 aces all rolled into one. You just need to know when to show your hand." He spent the next hour walking me through the implications, confirming my interpretations of the arcane legal documents. The HOA, it seems, has been operating under a deeply mistaken assumption for decades. Their bylaws about the lake? Utterly unenforceable against the true owner. Any funds they've spent on lake maintenance? Potentially recoverable by you, if you were so inclined, as they were managing an asset they didn't own. This Patricia Vance, by the sounds of it, has just stepped on a very, very large landmine. My strategy began to coalesce. This wasn't just about proving my ownership. It was about exposing the HOA's fundamental overreach, humiliating Patty Vance, and setting a new, equitable standard for the community. The key, Arthur emphasized, was patience and precision. Let her continue to dig her own grave. Gather your evidence, Elias, Arthur advised. Every communication, every fine, every threat. Document it all. Get witness statements from other residents she's bullied. Build an incontrovertible case. I became a silent, methodical hunter. I installed discreet security cameras on my property, positioned to capture any HOA personnel attempting to interfere with my dock or the lake's edge. My smartphone became an extension of my hand, recording every interaction, every verbal threat, every condescending dismissal. I started attending HOA meetings, sitting quietly in the back, observing Patty Vance in her element. She held court, dismissing dissenting voices with a wave of her hand, quoting non-existent bylaws, and presenting bloated budgets for common area maintenance that seemed disproportionately focused on the lake. My internal monologue became a running commentary of sarcastic observations. Ah, yes, the Lake Beautification Fund, conveniently paying for the lawn service around a body of water you don't own. Fascinating. I began speaking to my neighbors quietly at first, then more openly. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly woman whose prize-winning rose bushes had been deemed too vibrant and forced into a bland conformity by the HOA. Mr. Davies, a quiet veteran who had been fined for the incorrect shade of exterior paint on his shed. They all had stories, small indignities, subtle erosions of their autonomy. Patty Vance had a long history of wielding her power like a blunt instrument, crushing any hint of individuality. Their resentment was a palpable, simmering current beneath the surface of polite neighborhood interactions. I asked them to document their experiences, to write down dates, times, and specific grievances. Many were hesitant, afraid of retaliation, but a few, emboldened by my quiet resolve, agreed. I promised them anonymity until the time was right. The stage was set. My first move was subtle, a testing of the waters, a line cast to see if she would bite. I had my old firm, Sterling and Thorne. Arthur had insisted I keep my name on the door, even in retirement. Draft a formal, impeccably worded letter. It was sent to the HOA board, specifically addressed to Patricia Vance. It politely questioned the legal basis for the HOA's claims of ownership and regulatory authority over Lake Serenity, citing specific county records and parcel numbers, requesting clarification and supporting documentation for their assertions. It was a lawyer's letter, designed to be understated yet undeniably pointed. It landed like a quiet hand grenade. Patty Vance's response was precisely what I expected. She dismissed it with a flourish at the next HOA board meeting, her voice dripping with scorn. We received a rather curious letter from a law firm on behalf of Mr. Thorne. A fishing expedition, if you will, she said, pausing for a smattering of sycophantic laughter from her inner circle on the board. It questions our authority over the lake. A frivolous inquiry, I assure you. The lake is, and always has been, a common area. These are the desperate acts of a man who simply doesn't want to follow the rules. We will not be bullied. In fact, due to Mr. Thorne's continued defiance and frivolous legal actions, we've decided to increase his lake usage fine to $200 and institute a daily $50 charge until the unauthorized fishing ceases. Her arrogance was magnificent to behold. She was so convinced of her own righteousness, so blind to the possibility of error, that she was practically gift-wrapping my case. This was more than overreach. This was malicious, a public shaming designed to crush dissent. I simply smiled, a private, knowing smile that went unnoticed in the crowded room. The next escalation was swift and infuriatingly personal. I had placed a small, tastefully engraved plaque on a stone by the edge of the lake, near my dock. It read, Lake Serenity, in memory of Horace Thorne, who found his peace here. It was a simple, heartfelt tribute, unobtrusive and meaningful. 3 days after the HOA meeting, I found it gone. In its place, a handwritten note, crudely taped to a fence post. No unauthorized memorials. Remove immediately or face further fines. The signature was Patty Vance's. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about fishing or fines or regulations. This was about disrespecting my grandfather, desecrating a memory, violating a sacred space. My quietude, my desire for peace, evaporated like morning mist under a summer sun. The line had been crossed. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. Don't let anyone steal your peace. This wasn't just about my peace now. It was about his legacy. The gloves were off. I had planned to make my move at the next annual HOA general meeting to ensure maximum impact and public exposure. But Patty's act of petty vandalism, her complete disregard for decency, accelerated my timeline. The time for subtle maneuvers was over. It was time for the coup de grace. I spent the next few days meticulously preparing. My legal team, Arthur, and a couple of younger, eager associates from his firm who found the case endlessly fascinating, drew up a comprehensive legal complaint. It detailed Patty Vance's fraudulent misrepresentation of HOA authority, the unlawful collection of funds for an asset not owned, the harassment, the malicious actions, and the deliberate disregard for actual property laws. The complaint included every fine levied, every threatening letter, every recorded interaction, and the collective witness statements from the other bullied residents. It was a masterpiece of legal precision, a loaded weapon aimed squarely at the heart of her power. But the true masterstroke, the grand reveal, would be far simpler, far more devastating. I was going to use my ownership of Serenity Holdings LLC to revoke all HOA-related easements and access rights to the lake. I wasn't just going to stop their interference. I was going to pull the rug out from under their entire perceived authority over the water body they claimed as their own. The Grand Pines Estates annual general meeting was held in the cavernous community clubhouse, a space usually reserved for potlucks and bingo nights, now filled to capacity. The air crackled with anticipation, a mixture of casual chatter and an underlying tension. Many residents knew something was brewing. The legal letter, the increased fines, the strange whispers of me attending meetings had stirred the pot. Patty Vance, resplendent in a royal blue pantsuit, stood at the podium, a fixed, triumphant smile on her face. She launched into her opening remarks, a self-congratulatory monologue about the HOA's achievements, about maintaining the integrity and value of our beautiful community, and of course about the ongoing efforts to curb unauthorized activities on Lake Serenity. Her eyes flicked to me in the back, a glint of challenge in them, daring me to interrupt. I did not. I waited. She moved on to new business, which, predictably, included a proposal to allocate more funds for lake management and security, ostensibly to deter rogue elements, her thinly veiled reference to me, from misusing the lake. She was setting the trap, presenting herself as the victim, the defender of community property. When she opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand, slowly, deliberately. "Yes, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice dripping with practiced disdain. "Do you have a relevant question or merely another frivolous complaint?" I walked to the microphone in the aisle, clutching a slim, red folder. The room quieted, all eyes on me. "Thank you, President Vance," I said, my voice calm, clear, and projected with the effortless authority of a man accustomed to addressing boardrooms. "I believe my question is highly relevant. It concerns the proposed expenditures for Lake Serenity. Specifically, I'm curious, President Vance, why the HOA believes it has the right to spend community funds on a property it does not own." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Patty's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "Mr. Thorne, that's an absurd assertion. Lake Serenity is a common area, clearly outlined in the HOA's original charter. Your previous legal inquiries have already been dismissed." "Dismissed, perhaps, but never disproven," I countered, my voice hardening. "And I assure you, my assertion is far from absurd. It is a demonstrable, legally verifiable fact. The HOA does not own Lake Serenity, and it never has. The murmur grew louder, tinged with confusion. Patty's face began to flush, a patchy red spreading across her neck. "That's preposterous," she snapped, gripping the podium. "I won't stand for such defamatory statements. The lake is HOA property. It's been common property for 50 years. Indeed, I agreed, my tone almost conversational. 50 years precisely. Because 57 years ago, in 1965, the lake was acquired by a private holding company, Serenity Holdings, LLC. This company, not the HOA, became the sole legal owner of Lake Serenity. The HOA, when it was formed, was merely granted specific limited easements, such as aesthetic viewing access, subject to the owner's consent. Those easements never included unrestricted recreational use, and certainly not the right to fine or regulate the owner himself. I opened my red folder. "I have here," I continued, holding up a certified copy of the original 1965 deed transfer to Serenity Holdings, LLC, the irrefutable proof. "I also have here," I held up another document, equally official, "the original stock certificates for Serenity Holdings, LLC, indicating 100% ownership by my late grandfather, Horace Thorne. And finally," I said, my gaze locking with Patty's, whose face was now a mask of dawning horror, "I have my grandfather's will, which bequeathed all of his shares in Serenity Holdings, LLC to me, Elias Thorne." I paused, letting the words hang in the stunned silence. "Which means, President Vance, that I, Elias Thorne, am the sole, legal, and undisputed owner of Lake Serenity." The silence broke. A collective gasp, then a cacophony of whispers, growing into shocked shouts. "He owns the lake? All of it? But the bylaws?" Patty Vance's perfect composure shattered. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted around the room, desperately seeking an ally, a way out. "This is a lie. A trick!" she shrieked, her voice suddenly shrill, unmodulated. "He's trying to seize community property. It's fraud." "Hardly, President Vance," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "It's simply the truth. And it means that your lake management fund has been collecting money for an asset you do not own. It means every fine you've levied for lake usage, including the ones against me, were illegal. And it means that all those restrictive bylaws you've enforced regarding the lake are null and void, because they were imposed by an entity with no legal standing over the property." I looked out at the stunned faces of my neighbors. "For decades," I explained, my voice carrying conviction, "my grandfather, and subsequently I, have allowed you, the residents of Grand Pines, to enjoy the lake. Not because the HOA granted permission, but because it was our choice. My grandfather was a man who valued community and quiet enjoyment. He never leveraged his ownership, never imposed restrictions. He simply allowed it to be. But now, due to the HOA's recent, aggressive, and frankly illegal actions, particularly against me and my grandfather's memory, that benevolence must come to an end." I held up one final document, a legal notice I'd had Arthur's firm prepare. "As of this moment," I announced, "I am hereby formally revoking all existing easements related to Lake Serenity previously granted to the Grand Pines Estates Homeowners Association. Effective immediately, all HOA-related access, maintenance, and regulation of Lake Serenity is terminated. Furthermore, I am filing a comprehensive lawsuit against the HOA board, specifically targeting President Vance and her inner circle for misrepresentation, fraud, and the unlawful collection and expenditure of community funds for a property not owned." Patty Vance collapsed in her chair behind the podium, her face ashen, her carefully coiffed hair askew. Her attempts to regain control were pathetic. You can't do this," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. This is my community." "No, President Vance," I corrected her, my voice devoid of emotion. "It's my lake. And the community, I believe, is finally awake to the truth of your leadership." The room erupted. Residents, their initial shock giving way to outrage, surged forward, not towards me, but towards Patty Vance. They had been lied to, controlled, and financially exploited by this woman who had wielded power she never truly possessed. The power had shifted irrevocably and completely. The fallout from that meeting was swift and absolute. Patricia Vance resigned from the HOA board in disgrace within 24 hours, though that was merely the first domino to fall. My lawsuit, now backed by a growing chorus of other residents who had been similarly victimized by her tyrannical rule, proceeded with chilling efficiency. The evidence I had meticulously gathered, combined with the irrefutable proof of lake ownership, painted a damning picture of her malfeasance. She had authorized thousands of dollars in lake maintenance from HOA funds, money that should have been spent on common areas the HOA actually owned. The punitive fines she had levied were retroactively declared illegal, and a class action suit was initiated by the residents to recover their losses. Patty Vance, once the imperious queen of Grand Pines Estates, became a pariah, facing not only the crushing weight of the lawsuit, but also the relentless social ostracization. She was forced to sell her home, a grand McMansion that had once been the symbol of her status. The process was humiliating, her property lingering on the market, a scarlet letter on the real estate listings. Eventually, she sold it at a significant loss and, I heard, moved several states away, leaving behind a legacy of financial ruin and bitter resentment. Now in a position of total, undisputed power over Lake Serenity, I had a choice. I could have locked it down, turned it into my private preserve, a testament to my victory. But that wasn't my grandfather's way, and it certainly wasn't how I wanted to honor his legacy. I had fought to protect his memory, and his benevolent spirit dictated a different path. I called another community meeting. This time, I was the one standing at the podium. I announced my intention to establish the Horace Thorne Serenity Trust, a nonprofit entity dedicated to the preservation and responsible enjoyment of Lake Serenity. I formally donated ownership of the lake to this trust, ensuring its protection forever. The trust would be managed by a democratically elected board of residents, committed to transparency and community benefit, completely separate from the HOA. I established clear, fair rules for lake access. Fishing was encouraged, non-motorized boating welcomed, swimming permitted in designated areas. Rules would be based on safety, ecological preservation, and mutual respect, not arbitrary control. The community, humbled and invigorated by the dramatic shift, embraced the new order with enthusiasm. A new, ethical HOA board was elected, comprising residents who genuinely cared about the well-being of the community, not just their own petty power. They moved quickly to revise the bylaws, focusing on actual community needs, not on personal dictates. Grand Pines Estates had been purged of its toxic leadership, and a new, more just and equitable era had begun. The lake, once a point of contention and control, became a symbol of restored peace and community spirit. Today, I sit on my dock, the familiar weight of my fishing rod in my hand. The surface of Lake Serenity shimmers, reflecting the afternoon sun, no longer a battleground but a haven. I cast my line, the gentle splash a perfect counterpoint to the rustling leaves. The peace I sought after my career and my grandfather's passing has returned, profound and unyielding. It's not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of a hard-won victory. I look towards the small, beautifully crafted wooden sign now installed by the public access point to the lake, near a new, sturdy dock built by community volunteers. It reads, Horace Thorne Serenity Lake. A gift to the community, it's a quiet tribute, a lasting monument to a man who understood that true power lay not in control, but in quiet stewardship and generous spirit. My grandfather had taught me that bullies defeat themselves, that true power often comes from unexpected places, and that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, is the only path to genuine peace. I had reclaimed my sanctuary, honored his legacy, and in the process, restored a sense of justice to a community that had been held captive by arrogance. The lake, my lake, was serene once more, and I, Elias Thorne, was finally truly at peace. Remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more stories of justice served and bullies defeated. And tell me, what's the most outrageous HOA story you've ever heard?